Thank you so much. Can you hear me pretty good? Good, good. I didn't want to try that climb up there. I didn't think I was going to make it. And but I also think that you're in trouble when you got two Chicago guys from Humboldt Park here, man. I don't know. I think we need to nip that in the bud, as we were saying outside. We don't want too many of us coming in. Anyway, I'm honored to be here. I'm honored for a lot of reasons because I feel that this is a very potent group of people. And to me, it's very important. I talk to so many people, so many audiences, but I kind of know that some audiences have a little special importance because of the fact that they will change policy. They are makers of policy. They will be in the communities. They will be in the streets, and this is who you are. So I find this to be a very intimate, important discussion to have with you. And what I hope is that you will discuss with me and dialogue with me about your concerns, your issues, and all your questions so we can make the most of this. Because to me, it's an opportunity more than anything to really delve deeply into this issue of gangs in our communities and to go as deep as we can because we need to, because it's an issue that, of course, strikes everybody in all communities, and I think that for the most part, we're lost about what to do. So it's important for us to discuss it. I wanted to bring up a few things that might be helpful in this dialogue. One is, of course, the books that I've written, and just to let you know, this is the latest version of Always Running. We've had like 3 versions of it now. But when I wrote the book, I had no idea it was going to be so impactful. I initially wrote it because my own son joined a gang in Humboldt Park. And I was a writer already. I was a poet, and I was already doing journalism, and I thought, well, I had 20 years worth of material I could have drawn from, and I decided to put this memoir together. So as a memoir, it's a true life account, and I know memoirs are under question right now because a lot of people who have actually fabricated things. This is a true life account. Nothing's fabricated, nothing's imagined. The only problem is that I couldn't name real names and I couldn't put people behind real crimes because there's some very graphic, hardcore things in this book. However, my goal was to bring out the truth of that life so that anybody that reads it can really begin to understand the value of trying to, learn to live a decent, wholesome, healthy, creative, imaginative life. This is the way that I work with young people. And it ended up helping a lot of kids, including some of my son's friends and homies from the neighborhood, but it didn't quite help my son. And so you know, and some of you may know, I wrote it in my introduction, my son didn't quite make it as much as I tried. It's very hard when a father sees his kid, fall into that world of what I call the web of the crazy life. In Chicago, he was part of what was called the Insane Nation, the insane group of gang members that were connected with the folk gangs. And the insanity was, they stamped it, they were maniacs or insane. And it was kind of like you see what they're trying to say, and that they're crazy. And we were crazy. La vida loca, that's what that means, a crazy life. And I saw my son fall deeper and deeper in it, and I didn't know what to do, and I tried many things and didn't quite help him. And when he was 21 years old, after he had already done 2 prison terms, we thought that was the end of his problems. He actually was supposed to come to a Youth Struggling for Survival meeting, and I told him, talk to the kids, help them out, you've been through this, maybe you can help straighten out a few young kids. So he said, sure, but unfortunately, we didn't make it that morning. We called around, we didn't know what had happened, and we finally found out later that evening that he was arrested that morning in a shooting. 1 person was actually shot, and 2 police officers were shot at, and he was arrested. And now, the next morning, when we went to arraignment, he was facing 40 years to life, 21 years old. So it was very devastating for my family, for us, and for the community who worked very hard for him. We spent a year and a half fighting the life sentence. We weren't going to get him off. He did a terrible thing that I could not condone. He knew I could not condone it, but I did promise him one thing. I would not abandon him. The issue with me and my son, as I mentioned in my book, is that I neglected him as a father for a lot of reasons. I was a heroin addict for 7 years, and I also drank for 20 years on top of it. I had 27 years of what I call a dream, and I finally woke up. And what woke me up, believe it or not, was my kids. And I woke up a little bit too late for my son. I should not have waited that long, and I don't have anybody to blame but me. I should not have been a neglectful father. I saw the end result of that when my oldest son ended up in the streets just like me. And I was doing what I didn't like about my dad, I was doing the same thing to him. And I realized that I was going to have to change, and I did. And I sobered up 15 years ago, and it was a long, hard struggle, but I have been sober ever since then. And I have to say that even though I tried to save my son, in essence, he saved me. And this is part of the story of how, if we help our youth, we think we're helping them, but guess what happens to the rest of us? We change. We become more healed. We become stronger in our own resolve. Every adult who has at least one young person they're mentoring, even if it's their own kid, but other kids in particular, because really, I'm going to tell you, it's hard to mentor your own kid, for one thing. But helping somebody else, you yourself will get transformed. It's important for us to connect with young people again, and to connect with them in a way that they can rely on you, they can trust you, and in a way that they will get real, healthy, strong guidance, which is what they're needing. And I want to talk about where that guidance goes. But for now, I want to say that my son, we spent a year and a half fighting the life sentence. We did finally convince a judge to give him a lesser sentence, and the minimum that he could give my son was 28 years. So unfortunately, he is serving 28-year sentence in the state of Illinois Department of Correction. Just so you know, actually he's done pretty good. It's very hard to mature in prison. It's very hard to get out of the gang life, but he has done that. And so I have to give him credit for that. 7 years into his sentence, he wrote me a letter in which he said, "Dad, I finally know what you were trying to do. I finally understand why you were trying to help." And most of the time, as you know, a lot of these guys, 2 or 3 years in prison, hardly anybody's there for them. And we stood by him all these years, and that has helped him tremendously. He got out of the gang life. He is now very spiritually engaged. He is now very active in helping other prisoners, and he has 3 more years, believe it or not, and he could get his first parole date. So in 14 years, he could be out, and we're praying and hoping that he will be out. I just want to mention that because this is all personal to me, as I'm sure it is to you. But now I want to talk about some bigger issues. One of the things, besides this book, by the way, I also recommend, if you get a chance, to pick up this book, Hearts and Hands, Creating Community in Violent Times. This is kind of like a second part of this book. It's an also true life account of the work I did, 30 years worth of work, but mostly the 15 years I spent in Chicago working with gangs. And it has a lot of the Chicago experience in here because we learned a lot working with kids who were heavily gang involved, stepping into their families' lives, into their lives, getting called at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, trying to save kids from killing each other, trying to go to the hospitals after they've been shot, going to the court when they're facing all this prison time. We did a lot of work with these kids and their families, and this tries to summarize that work. It also tries to summarize in general the whole gang spectrum of the United States, as well as the history of gangs. There's a chapter on the history of gangs in the U.S. I think this would be very helpful for anybody. I do want to mention another book only because it's my second biggest book. This is a children's book that I wrote for kids thinking of joining gangs. I don't just write children's books. My children's books have something reality, impactful kind of thing. So they gave me the challenge of how do you write a book about a kid thinking of joining gangs so that he would not do it. And it was very difficult, but I finally came up with a book. And as you can imagine, it's a reality-based book, but it's used widely in inner city schools. And unlike a lot of children's books, this one has some reality, such as one person gets shot. This is the reality of a lot of our kids. The reason why it's in this book, because they have so many fantasy books in schools and very little they can relate to. And this is a book that at least tells them what they're seeing every day, but also tries to provide them a way out. Because you can't get away from the reality, but they do need to have an imagination about what's possible. Because the reality can constrict you. The reality can keep you from dreaming. The reality can keep you from thinking beyond the options, the very limited options that you might have in front of you. So it's very important that a lot of this work involves imagination, creativity, and options, real options. Otherwise, what good is it to tell kids, don't sell drugs when that's the only economic life that some of their community is? What good is it to tell them, don't shoot nobody, don't do this, don't do that, unless you got real alternatives that are viable and meaningful for them so that they can do something that's really important and creative and imaginative and something that will also be healthy for the community. The third document I want to share with you is this one that just came out. This is a community-based gang intervention model. It's the only comprehensive community-based gang intervention model I know of in the country, and it was created in about a year's time with all these various organizations in Los Angeles. It was created as a challenge to, can we create a plan and a model for helping kids in gangs? And by the way, LA is known for having a lot of differences between black and brown, somebody fighting. Well, most of it's media hype, as you can imagine. A lot more people, black and brown, unite and do things. But this is a great example of black and brown unity. The majority of people in this work were black and brown leaders, some of them 30 years or more working with gang intervention projects, and they helped create this plan. And I'm willing to get this to you by email. If you give me a card or an email address, I can send it to you because I'm sending it all over the country. We're getting it out as wide as possible. Just so you know, last February 13th, we didn't expect this. The LA City Council, which is a very powerful council in the second largest city in the United States, voted unanimously to accept this gang intervention model. And it's a historic vote. We have no idea what that means because our idea about, unfortunately for some of the politicians, is that sometimes they vote things and then that's the end of it. So we'll have to work on the next step, which is how do you implement it? But it's a big historic vote because it supports the idea of community-based gang intervention versus things coming from outside the community. So you all are welcome to get this copy of this plan if you give me your emails. The main thing I want to talk about, though, is kind of like the essential aspects of this plan and essential aspects of the work. But before I do that, I want to talk about what I have seen in young people, what I call the 5 empties, the 5 big empties. Because what I notice is gangs fill a void. If you have these empties in the community and in the lives of families and in the lives of young people, you have a very good possibility that they would join gangs, get into drugs, get suicidal, or do a lot of destructive things. Kids, like human beings, I know we always seem like we can't figure us out, but there's a part of us that's very predictable. You understand what I'm saying? And I think that we have to get to the point that we realize that we should stop being amateurish in our work with youth and community. We have generations of work with this, and we have to start drawing as if we really know what we're talking about. Because sometimes we act like we don't know and our hands are up in the air, we don't know what to do. You know what? We have so much experience and knowing how to create community that we should just start acting like professionals and people who know what they're doing, because when we act as if we don't know what we're doing, guess who falls through the cracks? Our youth. They really want to know that we are a cohesive, coherent grouping of adults in their lives. They want that. And the reason why they get upset and they can't even articulate it is that we're completely ourselves not in coherency and working together. We're at odds. And this hurts our community and it hurts our kids. So the 5 empties I will share with you, they're very basic. One empty, and this I found in all kinds of gang kids, but I found them in, again, a lot of other kids. This is not just a gang situation. Almost any kid that feels lost or disconnected or disaffected has it. The first empty, and this is no particular order, but just to throw it out there, is they feel very rootless, R-O-O-T, uprooted, disconnected to history, family, traditions. Especially if you're inner city, because a lot of people in the inner city were actually people who moved either from the South or from Mexico or Puerto Rico or other countries to come to work in whatever industry and life there existed. And pretty soon some of them had traditions and had family values, and some of them even had elders and everything else. That gets kind of destroyed when your whole eldership world is based on the job that you have. You hear what I'm saying? The job and the time you have to clock in determines what your relationships are, not who's the elder and who's the father and who's the mother. These things begin to fall apart in industry. By the way, industry, I'll talk about it, but industry is a very big factor in gangs. Because for the kind of gangs that we're talking about now, there's probably always been gangs, but the kind of gangs we're talking about are totally connected to industry. This is an important point. So the empties is they feel rootless. They don't feel rooted anymore. Many times they find their roots and connection with the gang. You know, they put everything behind the neighborhood, the set, the clique, the nation, whatever it might be. They go all out because they have no other roots that they can connect to. Second thing I found is that they start feeling very helpless. They feel that there's nothing they can do and there's nowhere to go. And that, by the way, doesn't come just from them. It comes from the fact that there probably is nowhere to go. Very little anyway. They don't know that there's people that can help them. And when the adults who try to help them, the first thing they learn is that if you give them a hard enough time, guess what? They'll give up on you. And this is why when I was a kid, I gave everybody a hard time because I knew eventually they would give up. And I would stop investing in them because why would I want my heart broken, my relationships broken if I knew they were going to give up? So I just soon get rid of them now. You hear what I'm getting at? I test everybody. And that's what kids do. I would say the worst things. And oh my God, and then they would walk away. It was so easy to get rid of adults. It's so easy. Just say the wrong things, do the wrong, everybody that falls apart. Zero tolerance, you know the whole thing. The thing that saved me is that there was at least one guy who would not give up on me. He kept coming for 2 years. I told him to drop dead. And he kept coming back. And when I was sitting in jail the last time, he was the only one that came and visited me. The only one who bothered. My family wasn't there. No homies were there. He was the only one. That helped me a lot to know there was one person that I could trust. So being helpless is a very big empty in the lives of kids. Third is they start feeling hopeless. You can imagine. No hope, no light at the end of the tunnel. Why bother? They also, related to that, start feeling powerless because then you feel you can't change nothing. Why should I bother doing anything? In many ways, when I was a kid and I saw my first gang, I was so broken down, beaten down kid that when I saw a gang break through my elementary school, I joined a gang when I was 11. They broke through the elementary school and scared everybody. They had homemade guns, they had sticks and bats, they were chasing after some guys. Teachers got scared, and you know what I looked at in my 10, 11-year-old eyes? That's power. I want that power. I felt so powerless that I saw a gang that could scare people. I thought, I want that power. That's got to be something. So being powerless is a very important aspect. Personal power, as well as the sense that in your community, you have no economic, political, and social power. You hear what I'm saying? Because discrimination and poverty also contributes to the sense there's no power here. My dad works all day long, and he still doesn't control what's going on in this community. He can barely control what's happening in his household. Where's the power? So the gang has power. Well, in a semblance of power, by the way. Okay, and then the fifth one, the one that kind of summarizes all the empties that I found, and finally, when you get to this point, you have a good candidate for anything that's really destructive or suicidal or homicidal, and that is meaningless. They lose all sense of meaning. Therefore, nothing matters, and I shouldn't try, and everything just completely drains. Spirit, energy drains. I find that a lot of the hardcore gang members are not just homicidal, they're suicidal. You understand what I'm getting at? They don't mind hurting somebody because someday they expect to be shot and killed themselves. And I see those kids, because I was the same way, standing in the street corner, doing the hand signs, yelling out the gang name, wanting to be killed in that blaze of glory, as they call it, for the nation, the set, the barrio, whatever it might be. They want this gives them meaning. It's the only meaning that matters to them because everything else is meaningless. Life is meaningless. Family is meaningless. And you know, I remember when I was a young kid, and I went to a lot of funerals for a lot of homies. And my sister, one day, we went to a funeral together. She says, "Aren't you scared that that'll be you?" And I told her, I can hardly wait till I had a funeral just like that. I can hardly wait until I would be loved like that. Mothers crying, all the homies sad, the girls and everything. That was the most important thing in my mind, that I would die and have that kind of funeral. So those are the 5 empties, and you can get different aspects of it, and you can see kids. They may not articulate it, you can see them carrying those empties in their lives. And what do you do with empties? You fill them up. What else is there to do? You have to provide them a sense of getting rooted in some kind of way, of getting help, of getting hope, of getting power, and of getting meaning. You hear what I'm saying? The answer is right in the problem. These are 5 areas that we miss completely with young people. And I will want to share with you ways of doing that, but before I do, let me just say real quickly, I've been working in the 2 gang cities, the largest gang cities in the country, Chicago and Los Angeles. And I'm going to give you a reason why they're the largest gang cities. Not because, Florida doesn't have gangs, or Florida doesn't have possibilities, or New York City, which is the largest city in the country, doesn't have gangs, or other cities. There's a reason why LA and Chicago are the 2 largest gang cities, and I'm going to give you some of the reasons. There's many, but I'll give you the fundamental ones, so you understand why now the biggest problem in the country is LA-based and Chicago-based gangs. I know in Florida, the biggest problem with gangs here either come from Chicago originally or from Los Angeles. So you have to look at those areas because they contributing to gangs all over. I was in Delaware, Wilmington, Delaware, and I saw Latin Kings and Sutres going fighting against each other. Latin Kings from Chicago and Sutres from LA. They're everywhere. I was in Storm Lake, Iowa, where the police were telling me that the Latin Kings were buffing up because they're going to go to war with MS-13. So these are the 2 big problems. You have Bloods and Crips all over the country. And in New York City, even though New York City had its own history, the gangs in New York, believe it or not, are primarily either from Chicago or LA, the big gangs, the big ones that are getting a lot of notoriety. So let me explain to you why those cities became the big gang capitals. And one is very easy to figure out. Both cities are the largest industrial manufacturing cities in the United States. Now, I know people don't think of LA as an industrial and manufacturing city. They think it's all Hollywood. I understand. LA is only got 7% of its industries in Hollywood. Hollywood does make a lot of money, but it's not the industry. LA was created as an open shop industrial town, and it is today and even now more manufacturing than Chicago, believe it or not, though Chicago is more industrial. Chicago, as you know, was the center of the country. All the railroads met there. It became the meat packing, steel mill, basic industry city for almost the whole country. And of course, you got cities like Detroit with the Fords, and you got Michigan. You got all this. And by the way, all these Rust Belt cities, eventually, all of them suffered to the deindustrialization of the 80s. So this is the biggest contributor to the gang problem recently, was the deindustrialization of the United States. Because what happened with Chicago and LA is that they also got deindustrialized. The big steel mills, the meat packing in Chicago, all gone practically. All the major industry gone. In LA, the same thing. LA, by the way, had steel mills, had auto plants, had rubber plants. In order to get out of gang life, I had to work in industry. I worked in foundries, I worked in paper mills, I worked in construction, I worked in a steel mill for 4 years, all in LA. And those left the communities in the 80s. And LA, South Central LA, which everybody talks about, we talk about all the gangs, fed into that industry. East LA, which has more gangs than any other community in the United States, fed into that industry. What happened when that industry left? The jobs. The jobs are gone. The jobs that sustained family and community were gone. This happened mostly in the 80s. It affected mostly inner city communities, even though really all communities were affected. But inner city communities got hit really hard. But something happened in the 80s too at the same time. And this is kind of interesting. The war on drugs. You all remember the war on drugs? You remember President Reagan declaring war on drugs? And as you know, and this is just a terrible fact of life, sometimes when we go to war, we actually make things worse. You know what I'm talking about? I remember in the 60s, the war on poverty. Very important decision. I'm sure good people really wanted to see it happen. Actually, poverty got worse. The war on drugs, Nixon did the first war on drugs, and then Reagan, and guess what? Drugs became worse than ever. Not only that, in the 80s, drugs came in we never even had before. Did you know crack never existed before Reagan's war on drugs? Crystal meth didn't exist before Reagan's war on drugs. Ecstasy and some of these drugs that all of a sudden pop out of nowhere, all of a sudden now exist. So the war on drugs didn't do anything but put like a foot on the neck of poor communities and did not do anything to stop the drugs. Gangs are perfect for drug trade because they're an organized, cohesive force that can get the drugs into the streets, distributed, and sold in a very quick manner. So some of the gangs that were in existence in the 20s, 30s, and 40s in LA and in Chicago since the 50s and 60s, all of a sudden in the 80s, they became a very big deal because now they had something really they can hook up to. Gangs were not necessarily drug-oriented before then, just so you know. The Latin Kings, big gang as it was, started in the 60s, was not drug-oriented. You understand what I'm getting at? But by the 80s, they became a major organization to get drugs into the streets and in the market of the inner city communities, as well as all the other gangs. So this is two things. Jobs get gone and drugs comes in. You got a perfect scenario for what you're seeing in the worst violent period in the history of this country. And I'll tell you one of the statistics that should let you know how bad it was. From 1980 to the year 2000, Los Angeles alone, just one city, lost 10,000 young people to drugs and gang violence. That's like a civil war in some small country somewhere. This is the US of America. This is not third world, you know what I'm saying? We are still the most violent country in the world, but you can really feel it when you're in this inner city like Chicago or in Detroit or Baltimore or even Orlando, and you can see the effect of what happens with violence. Guns were more proliferating than ever in the 80s. Whole gun industry had a whole world in the inner city. And not only that, there were guns from wars from other parts of the world that ended up in the hands of kids in the inner city. Uzis, AK-47s, all kinds of weapons you never could imagine now became providence of kids. I remember in Chicago one time, there was a shooting and some neighbors called me up at 2 or 3 in the morning, you gotta help to stop this gang warfare, they want to retaliate. I went and talked to the family right there, actually it was in Logan Square, talked to the family, and then I was walking down the street and I saw this 8-year-old kid who I happened to know, but he looked at me and started running. So I chased him just to see what's going on because I knew him. He had a Tech 9 in his little jacket. 8-year-old kid with a Tech 9. So this is very serious. And so you have drugs and you have guns proliferating. And I'm going to tell you something just so you know. These drugs and guns did not get made up by these kids. They were not created by those kids. This is an industry bigger than them that somehow gets into our communities. And somebody has to look at what happened there. Because they brought it, and I'll tell you one of the things that I know happened. Overruns from a lot of the drug dealers got sold in our communities under the radar kind of thing. I know because there was people that used to sell them out of the parking lots and they were coming from the big dealers. They were selling guns and anyway, we can get into that, but that did not happen by no accident. And now you got kids with guns, little kids. So anyway, so you have those two things that I think are very important factors in why the gangs got so big in LA and Chicago. Why did they spread? Very important because now, like I said, we're seeing them everywhere. There are local gangs in Orlando, I'm sure, local, native-bred gangs. But the biggest gangs I understand are those gangs that come from Chicago or LA. The reason why they spread, this is why suppression does not work. I know that suppression is the #1 way that people want to deal with gangs. They want to make it just a law enforcement issue, and I have explained to you why I have an issue with that. I have no problem with law enforcement. This is not an anti-law enforcement statement. I'm going to explain to you why, in fact, it's against the law enforcement that they become the sole organizations dealing with gangs. It hurts law enforcement, and I'll tell you why. First of all, when you suppress, what happened in Chicago and LA is they had the 2 largest suppressive mechanisms to the departments, the law enforcement, to the federal government, all kinds of ways to suppress gangs. They even destroyed whole housing projects to get rid of gangs. Cabrini Green is a great example. Have you ever heard of Cabrini Green? Big, massive housing project, literally destroyed, supposedly because it was ungovernable, and they figured the best thing to do is just get rid of the people. What you do is you squeeze communities. Instead of helping that community, instead of providing jobs, resources, skills, and other options for them, you squeeze them out. And where do they go? They go to the suburbs first, and then from the suburbs they go to Indiana, and they go to Michigan, and from there they end up in New Jersey, and some of them, a whole mess of them ended up in Florida. You hear what I'm getting at? The same thing in LA. They squeezed whole communities. The largest housing project west of the Mississippi was called Aliso Village. It was considered ungovernable. They completely destroyed the housing project. It actually had like 10,000 families. I don't even remember how. It was huge. A lot of people. Got rid of them, and guess where they went? Suburbs and or other states and or Florida. I'm just saying Florida, but they actually went all over the place. You're seeing why it happened. And I'll tell you one of the things, just a funny story, kind of funny. My neighborhood is just outside of East LA. It was very poor. It used to be the poorest community in LA County. Right now it got gentrified. You know, that's another way they squeeze out communities, by the way. They gentrify them. Humboldt Park is completely getting gentrified. What that means is people with money have come into the poor communities and rehab the homes. It looks nice, but they get rid of all the poor people. And again, they don't get any better. They just get pushed out. So what happened in my neighborhood is they gentrified the whole gang. The gang did not stop. It just moved out. The gang is actually 6 times bigger than when I was in it. And then I found out in Omaha, Nebraska, I was invited to Omaha, Nebraska, and the second biggest gang in Omaha was from my neighborhood, Lomas. I go, what in the hell? Lomas, what does Lomas mean? It means hills. There's no hills in Omaha. The second biggest gang after the Crips in Omaha is Lomas. You know why? Because some families, somehow one family or somebody came from my neighborhood, ended up in Omaha, started the gang, and now it's the second biggest gang. This is just an example of what happens when you squeeze communities. The gangs don't die, they just get spread out. And here's a big problem with LA gangs, as you know. Deportations. I'm giving you some of these issues because government contributes to the gang problem. People may not think so, but I think government can also provide answers. But they contribute with policies that are not well thought out. LA gangs are now in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. They're in Cambodia, they're in Armenia. We have spread the gang out around the world. From LA in particular, what happened is the LA riots, remember? And everybody said, well, the LA riots was a gang thing. The gang started it. So they went after the suppression, went after the gangs. They sent 10,000 Bloods and Crips to Belize, a country that only had 150,000 people. And now Belize has got Crips and Bloods fighting wars down there. They sent so many of them to El Salvador, which, by the way, had a terrible civil war, went through a terrible time, and then all of a sudden now we're deporting tens of thousands of LA-based gang kids. This is where the Mara Salvatrucha got very big and powerful. You hear what I'm saying? The MS-13, just so you know, is just one gang of 700 gangs in LA. It is not the worst. Nobody's, it's just one gang. But when you deport them to a country like El Salvador, the poorest, at the time, the poorest country in the whole hemisphere, no jobs, no resources, thousands of homeless kids, abandoned by war, abandoned by economy, guess what you do? You create a terrible situation where now kids are joining these gangs. LA gangs came to El Salvador, sophisticated, trained in prisons, with all these tattoos, with the style, this certain kind of LA style, you know what I'm talking about? And these kids ate it up. Now you got 10,000, they say, maybe more, actually probably more. They say there's 100,000 LA-based gangs in Central America alone. 100,000, that's enough to change a culture. El Salvador's only got like 5 to 6 million people. More than half of those 50,000 are in El Salvador alone. That's enough to change the whole culture. And you know what? It's our policies that unfortunately contributed to this. You hear what I'm getting at? And I talked to an ICE officer about this. I was on a radio show with a San Francisco police officer and an ICE officer from the immigration, and I challenged them on this. I go, what good is it to deport all these people that aren't helped, aren't given any assistance, and they go to these countries and completely change the culture of those countries? Well, you know what his answer was? That's not my problem. My problem was just to deport them. They're illegal. They don't belong in this country. My job is to do that. I understand that. But that's what we do. We only deal with one part of the problem. We create a big problem on the other end. So you get a big balloon, right? And you squeeze one part of the balloon, but the rest of it gets bigger. So we have actually, through our policy, and not only that, I gave us another statistic. In 1996, the immigration law changed. And now if you get convicted for a crime and you're undocumented, you get automatic deportation. Now, something you may not be aware of, since that time to now, 700,000 people have been deported with convictions and criminal convictions in the U.S., many of them gang members. 700,000 people. And unfortunately, the majority to Mexico and Central America. I say these things because we're not thinking through our policies. All we're doing is doing immediate gratification thing, let's solve it immediately, and forgetting that all you're doing is spreading the problem. So our policies have actually contributed to making things worse. Our economic policies, our political policies, social policies are making things worse. So then what's the answer? How do we resolve it? Well, we have a lot of ideas. Some of them is in this plan. But the main thing is not to squeeze our communities, to actually help those communities, to provide the actual ability for these young people to get incorporated into economy, into social and cultural life, to be part of the community in the sense by giving them skills, knowledge, awareness, mentorship, and connections. Because these are the things they're going to need to continue to contribute. We do not think that prisons are the way to go, because what happened in the 90s is the prison industry grew tremendously. And as you know, now we have the largest prison population in the world. We're the land of the free, but we have more people behind bars than any other country in the world. And I will tell you something about California so you know. California has the largest prison system in the United States other than the federal government. The federal system is bigger. 175,000 people are in the California prison system. 30 years ago, when I was getting a lot of trouble, there was 15 prisons. Today, there's 35 prisons. And in that same time, only 1 or 2 colleges were built in the state of California. 80% of the people, 175,000, 80% of those young people are Chicano, Mexicano, Latino, and or African American. 80%. You hear what I'm getting at? This is not about crime. This is about something else. And by the way, since we don't do any rehabilitation in the prisons, what happens? We are using our tax dollars paid by us to train criminals. You hear what I'm getting at? When they go in the prison system, you don't provide any rehabilitation, you don't provide any skills, you don't provide any education, they're going to learn something. That's the university of the streets. And what they're going to learn is how to be better, organized, criminal, gang-related people. So they come out, and this happens time after time, worse off than when they came in. We paying for that. You know what I'm saying? It's our pocket that are training these kids. It costs us twice to send those people in prison than if they actually went to college. I just soon send them to college, but I know people are like, no, we can't send criminals to college. I just soon send them to college. You know why? Because at least they'll come back with some skills and knowledge and they'll be helpful in our communities. But now we're completely writing them off. They come back, and they come back. They're not all like sitting just waiting for the time to be free. They're learning things, and they come back and they contribute to the violence in our community. So what is our answer? Our answer, well, I'm going to tell you 5 things that I want to share with you, and I shared with the social workers students last time, that helps with kids. This is the work that I do. I do gang intervention. I do gang prevention. The prevention work that I do has to do with this beautiful center that we created in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. And I just want to show you all the programming. This is for the youth and for families. This is cultural. This is music. This is author readings. This is discussion of puberty rites of passage with professionals, experts. This is film nights. This is open mic nights. This is Pluma's writing circle. This is the Danza de Mastia Quetzalcoatl, an Aztec dance group. This is indigenous cosmology. And we also have a young warriors group based on the Youth Struggling for Survival model that I have now incorporated in the center. This center is called Tia Chucha Centro Cultural. Me and my wife started it 7 years ago. It's still active. We did lose our space because the city of LA, like a lot of cities, don't care about these places. And the landlord got rid of us to build a laundromat. Like we need another laundromat, with like a hole in the head, But anyway, they built a laundromat, fine. Business is business, but we had a long time. We have a temporary space. We're working very hard to get a bigger, better space. But even in a small, half the size what we had before, this is what we're doing. You know why? Because in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, the second largest Mexican community in the country after East LA, 450 to 500,000 people, about the size of Orlando, I'm guessing. There was not one bookstore, not one culture center, not one art gallery for all those people. And we created the only bookstore, we have a bookstore there, the only bookstore, culture center, art gallery for that community. This is why we did it, to fill the empties that are in our communities, because we know this saves lives. People, I don't have an anti-gang moniker on here. I don't even have gang intervention. If you're in a gang, come get it. I don't need that. I say get arts, get skills, get imagination, get mentoring, get rites of passage, get community, and that's why those kids come. Because I build on their assets, not their deficits. I look at kids and see they're good kids, even though some of them do some pretty bad things. And I want to build on what they have, their gifts, their dones, as we call it, their ability to have talent and to think and to speak and to do all the things they do. I want to build on that. Because if you build on that, it would help undermine the things that the gangs build on, which is their ability to be good soldiers. You understand what I'm getting at? We don't need more good soldiers. We need good warriors. Warriors are different because warriors think, strategize, plan, and most of the time they're not fighting. Most of the time they're doing poetry, they're dancing, they're singing, they're doing something, and they're fighting through words and through other means and strategies at work. So this is what we teach our young people. This is the way to go. A comprehensive, well-rounded thing. Not just one thing, because we can't, for example, I refer kids to jobs. I refer them to treatment. They might need mental and or drug treatment. I refer them to tattoo removal, because in LA they're heavily tattooed, so you can't get a job. They got tattoos on their forehead. There was a 12-year-old girl that was kicked out of school because she had her gang name tattooed on her forehead. So 12-year-old girl, I'm just letting you know, this happens. So we will give them tattoo removal, but I don't provide those services myself. I work in collaboration with other organizations to do that. I will also do court advocacy with other people who help. This is direct involvement, though, is with the imagination, with creativity, and I'm going to share you the 5 things that will help when you work with kids. And then I'm going to end with that, because I can keep talking, but I want to make sure you talk. I want to end with these 5 things, because to me, these are the things that I have learned, because it happened with me, and I've used it with kids in Chicago and LA. I'm talking about the source, root, place of where most of the gangs are coming from into Orlando and other communities. The first thing, and I'll tell you a story. Did I tell that story about the guy? I don't know if I told the social worker students this, but the most hardcore guy I ever worked with was a son of one of my homeboys. His gang name was Maton. What does that mean? Okay, so let me tell you his story real briefly, because you're not going to believe the end result of this. People say, well, you can work with kids who aren't in gangs or getting into gangs. You can prevent them. All power to them. I work with the hardcore gang people and change their lives. Because people are writing them off, and I'm not going to write them off. It's not easy. Some of them don't change. Some of them die before you can actually finish it. Some end up in prison for all their lives, but a lot of them do change. So here's Maton's story. When he was 3 years old, his father was killed by the police in my neighborhood. His father's in my book. When he was 11 years old, his mother shot him up with heroin for the first time. When he was 18, supposedly, and again, this is a lot of the neighborhood rumors, he killed a cop. We don't know, because they never could pin it on him. But he became a big-time extortioner. What he would do is he would go in the main drag of the neighborhood, and all the businesses, he burned down one business. Then he would go to all the other businesses and make them pay money so that they wouldn't have their buildings burned down. He became a hitman for the Mexican mafia, which, as you may not know, the Mexican mafia is the most organized, largest criminal enterprise in the United States. They're not from Mexico, by the way. They're not. People say they're Mexican mafia, but the Mexican drug cartels is a whole different world. Otra onda. They do connect with them, but they are U.S.-based Chicano gangs in Los Angeles that called the Mexican mafia. Anyway, he became a hitman for the Mexican mafia. He ended up in prison, and supposedly, according to his cousin, I don't know for sure, he killed 15 people. He killed a lot of people for the Mexican mafia. At one point, there was a riot in the prison. Somebody threw flammable liquid and burned 60% of his body. I'm just telling the story with this guy. He also has tattoos on his face all the way down to his toes. I mean, everywhere, every part of him. He had a huge tattoo on his neck. This guy's, you look at him, total gangster. What would you do with a guy like that? Just completely write him off. Nobody can help this guy. Well, it turns out that he's sitting in prison, and he reads my book. And he recognizes his dad. And something happened to him reading my book. He wrote me a letter, and he says, Luis Rodriguez, I don't know you personally. You knew my dad. Can you help me? And I didn't know what to do, because I knew about his reputation. I knew about him, actually. So I said, I wrote him a letter back, and I have a relationship with a lot of prisoners, and basically when I do with prisoners, 3 things I won't do with them. I don't do pen pals, you know what I'm saying? I don't give them any money. They always ask for money. I said, no, I don't give money to prisoners for a lot of reasons, but it's not a good idea. And 3, I won't do any illegal things. None of them. So I said, beyond all that, I give them books. I give them a lot of materials to help them. My job is to help them. If they don't want help, I don't want anything to do with them, But if they want to get help, we'll do work with them. Well, he writes me, so I wrote him back. I told him the 5 things. Okay, I tell you what, you want help? Try to do these 5 things. If you do them, great. And I had no idea that he would do them. Well, I'm going to tell you what I told him. The first thing I told him is get help. I told him, I know it's hard, but you know what? There are people that will help you. And you have to find those people. They're there. People say they're not there, but they are. And yes, some of them are hard to find, but you know what? You look for it. The thing about if you're sincerely looking for help, guess what? Help comes along. You know how that goes. You really want help, people will step up. It's rare, and it doesn't happen automatically, but I told him, get help. Stop being this tough, rugged guy. You know how this rugged individualist, it's more like a ragged individualist. It doesn't really work. You need help. Everybody needs help. I did not get anywhere without help. Okay, 2, you have to find your art. Find your passion. What are your gifts? So everybody's got one. Nobody tells us to gang kids. You got gifts, man. Music, art, dance, singing, mechanics, even being a teacher. There's a lot of gifts that people have. Find what you're passionate about and develop that. 3, I told him to find a cause bigger than himself. Help somebody. And, he had a kid, and I told him, well, be a father. That's a good cause. We need more fathers, good fathers. Okay, the next thing I told him was find a spiritual life. And I did not tell him which kind of spiritual life because I think they're all valid. In my view, spiritual practices are all valid. There's a lot of Christianity going into prisons, and that's fine. But it's not just Christianity, just so you know. There's a lot of ways for people to go. Christianity doesn't speak to everybody. It does speak to a lot of people, and that's fine. They find Christianity all part to them. I work with a lot of Christian, former gang members, former drug addicts in the streets. So I have no problem with that. But I do know there's a lot of ways to go. You know what he found? A Buddhist. I didn't know there was Buddhists in prison, but he found a Buddhist. And I couldn't imagine this guy, Maton, 60% of his body burned, all these tattoos, sitting there meditating, but all power to him. He found a Buddhist, and they learned meditation. And then the last thing I told him is the most important thing was you have to learn to own your life. Because what happens with gangs and drug addicts is they turn their life over to the gang, they turn their life over to drugs, they turn their life over to something else. They don't own it no more. The whole idea about La Vida Loca is that it's a web that you get caught in. And not a fly, you're a spider in the web. You yourself are keeping yourself raveled deeper in this web, which is why it's harder to unravel yourself. And it's this spider in the web that people tattoo themselves in prison and gangs. They don't even know why they're doing it. That means they're caught. Just like this guy, he has a chain. This is what it is. You're caught in that crazy life. And in here is La Virgen de Guadalupe, and on the bottom you can't hardly see it, but it says, Perdóname, Madrecita. I love you, Mom. I love you, God. I love you, but I can't stop myself. You know how that feels? I love my girlfriend, but I'm sorry. I'm in this life. I can't stop, won't stop. It's just the way life is. So I try to tell him, you got to own your life. You're not in a chain. You know what I'm saying? You're not in a self-imposed prison, even if you are in prison. You got to learn to be free no matter where you're at. And the only way to be free is for you to own your life, for you to be responsible for what you do, and to become a decent human being, because that's what we all need to be. And I tell these kids there's a way to be decent in this world. And you don't have to give up your dignity to do that. Because that's what happens with people who have zero tolerance and all these things. They put their dignity on the line. That's why nobody will change. You can have change, but keep their dignity. Keep them strong. And any one of these guys, including somebody like Maton, can do good. I'm going to tell you what happened with Maton. I didn't think he was dead. He did those 5 things. He got out of prison, and he even went against the Mexican mafia, which meant they went after him. They tried to kill him. He left the country with his boy. I didn't think he was going to come back. His cousin couldn't tell me where he was. And he says he wanted to thank me, but he didn't want me to know where he was. Well, he came back. I don't know why. He came back and he called me. I go, man, why did you do that? He says, well, I'm ready to come back. I'm ready to do some good. Today, he is the leading sobriety specialist in the Los Angeles area. An article in the New York Times was done about his work helping people get off drugs and gangs. He is now a very important human being doing some very good work. And apparently he also helped Britney Spears, I understand, but I don't know. Apparently he didn't help her too much. He didn't help her too much. Anyway, I wanted to mention that just to let you know that it's possible to make great changes, and that's really my message. We cannot write nobody. There should be no lost causes in our communities. Every young person is worth fighting for. In fact, as a wise man said, and I mentioned in a book, sometimes the lost causes are the only ones really worth fighting. Let's make sure that nobody nobody gets left behind. And I don't mean by the school law that says no kids behind and then we lose more kids. I'm talking about real not left any kid behind. And every kid is worth something, and you have to find what their particular gift and passion is and help them find that. Don't just put them in a box, conform them, and make them try to be good citizens. We want vibrant, alive, viable, and decent human beings who will be good fathers, good mothers, and will be great leaders in our community. So I want to leave you with that. Everyone is possible to be changed. Let's be the change so they can see that they, in fact, can change. So I want to thank you for listening. Thank you.